Hello, horror addicts. Kbatz here, Kristen Battistella. The vampires here. We were worried about the sunshine at the Mount Holly Book Fair. Instead, we're braving the wind and all the technological devices we have here.
It's been nice and shady.
Shady. We like the shade. Yes. So Brian McKinley is with me here now, a fellow vampire author.
Yes.
Ancient Blood is
Ancient
your
Blood?
series. Tell us about that.
It's the Order Saga is the official name of it, but the first one is Ancient Blood, and then there's Ancient Enemies, which is the sequel. That's the newest book, and the spin-off is Drawing Dead, which is a minor character gets his own book.
So you have all these books in the same universe.
Same universe, yeah. It's pretty much the idea is that this secret society of vampires called the Order runs everything behind the scenes. They control the major corporations, the governments, all that kind of stuff. The institutions that control humanity.
That's subversive. That's scary enough. But now you are horror. Mistaking the
more
horror.
or less. I call them supernatural or paranormal thrillers because they have more of a thriller, I guess, outline to them. Like there's a lot of action and a lot of tension and suspense. I don't tend to look at, because horror I look at the idea is to scare people. I don't see my intention to be scary. There might be elements that are, but I mostly look at I want to be entertaining. I want to be exciting.
We've discussed that before. We're talking about horror movies. How there's been a lot of this new phase where people keep talking about psychological horror and thrillers, and they're synonymous. And that's been around for a long time. Maybe it's becoming a new wave again, but they've always gone hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, ever since going back to Hitchcock with things like Psycho. I mean, that's a movie that often gets categorized as either horror or a psychological thriller or suspense, or they'll put it in all kinds of categories, and it depends on what aspect you're thinking of it as. But it really was kind of breaking new ground, the idea where psychology and the personalities of the characters, the mentality of the characters, and psychological issues really took a prominent place.
You're talking things that are more serious topics, but you do have a little bit of humor. You have a little bit of pop culture in your material as well.
Well, I like that. I like to do that. I try to find the humor in things, and I like books that are funny as well. So my main character, he's kind of a guy like me. He's a little snarky. He's into all of the pop culture things. So the things that happen in the book are very serious, and I deal with, try to make it realistic, the way things would really play out. But his reactions to them and the things he says, that's where I can sort of work the humor in.
So is that more cynicism, more of a dark kind of comedy, almost sardonic?
Oh, it's definitely, if it's it's black comedy.
And I guess we talk about often horror because we come from vampire crowd, so we braved the Twilight wave, and
we're just finally starting to live that down.
Is that because of a cultural standpoint, when people maybe that's what's more been the zombie phase we've talked about also, that people tend to identify with particular monsters depending on what's going on culturally?
Yeah, I read an article one time where they tried to trace that, and they said that when like conservative policies and stuff are in charge and people are afraid of that, you tend to get zombies, because the fear of zombies is the idea of giant brainless crowds sort of just consuming everything and destroying everything without thought. Whereas when you have people being more afraid of liberal ideas, you have the vampires, because they are sort of seductive, they're taboo, they're sort of, some people think they represent alternate sexuality and deviance and things like that. So when you have that conservative mindset of that's what you're afraid of, then the vampire seems like something that's scarier, because it's going to lead people astray, it's going to turn them into something else.
It seems strange to say, but I mean, I don't know, like 30 years ago vampires were not the thing. They were actually quite rare.
Yeah.
But how did you get involved in vampire writing?
Mostly because I read some stuff, like I read Anne Rice, and I read a few other pretty good vampire series at the time. I started playing the vampire role-playing game. And there wasn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't enough stuff out there that I really liked that was similar to the kinds of stories that I was coming up with in my role-playing games. So that kind of inspired me. I started writing the stories that I wanted to read. I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if if there were some books about vampires that had this intricate society, and you could have the politics and the scheming.
Well, even Anne Rice strayed. I mean, and now it's coming back more to the more Bram kind of traditional kind of monster kind of style. So, what kind of vampires do you have?
I try to cover all of the bases. I sort of look at, especially in Ancient Blood, I modeled all of the council members after sort of a different type of vampire. I have kind of a very traditional Dracula-esque vampire. I have a very Anne Rice type of vampire. I have vampires that are sort of my type of vampire, the very political, calculating, business type vampire almost. Then I have ancient ones that are into witchcraft and magic.
Wow.
And it was sort of a celebration of, there's a place, literally saying there's a place at the table for all of these, all the different types of vampires. I don't go with that idea of, let's make vampires scary again, or vampires have
Except the sparkles.
Well, the sparkles, the sparkles are one thing, but even with Twilight, bad as it is, has its place. It wasn't a good novel, but it got
vampires
people reading.
wouldn't have been popular without it.
Yeah, and it got a lot of young people reading. And sadly, the funny thing is, aside from like Edward, apparently most of the other vampires, like the bad guy vampires, are actually pretty badass. Like they're pretty vicious and hardcore, and you would not be ashamed of them normally. So if they just shifted the
just a little bit.
I had one reviewer who actually complimented my book by saying, so if somebody took a book and did, all about the, what are they called, the Venturi or the Ventari, something Venadante.
We don't know.
I don't know. I never got past a couple chapters in Twilight.
Yeah, me either.
But if somebody had taken the bad guys and written a whole book from their point of view, it would be Ancient Blood.
So regarding research, you didn't take one for the team and have to go through all of Twilight.
No, not just for that. No, by the time Twilight came out and got popular, I had already written.
How did you do your research?
I just started looking into different folklore. I went on the internet. I bought books, all of those books, like, vampire encyclopedias and, books about the mythology. I got the Montague Summers, the vampires, Kith and Kin. And I went back as much as I could, and I tried to look into the early stuff, the real folklore, what I found was so much of what we think we know as vampire tradition or vampire lore actually comes from either Bram Stoker or the movies.
Yeah.
And most of it is within the last century. The real stuff gets so much more complicated and so much more interesting, and I wanted to bring more of that in.
I think it's a recent genre, but also very old.
Yeah. And, people have been telling vampire stories for thousands of years.
But your books are all contemporary set.
Mostly. The Ancient Bloods the ancient ones are, Drawing Dead takes place in the 1930s.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I wanted to it's the origin story of the one character. So he starts off as a regular gangster, like a classic Prohibition gangster, and he gets made into a vampire. And again, my thinking with that was, okay, if you want somebody to be a ruthless vampire that's comfortable with killing and dealing with the secrets and not relating to the public and all of that, well, what's a better training ground than the mob? It's not that different. A mobster makes an easy transition.
So that was a different era of research.
Different era, yeah. And I've always loved the old gangster movies. And so that was fun for me. I got to bring in all that stuff and do even more research. And I learned about the 1939 World's Fair and how interesting that was. I have a major set piece at the end that takes place at the World's Fair.
But now it's Ancient Blood and Ancient Enemy.
Ancient Enemies, yeah.
Okay. Now
that's the two.
That's
with
two
Avery.
right now. How
and
many
then Drawing
more?
Dead.
Drawing Dead is in the same universe.
It's
What
the
do you
beginning.
have coming next?
Right now, I'm working on the sequel to Drawing Dead. It's called Drawing Thin. They're probably, I have the whole title kind
So
of.
are they?
The conceit.
They're each going to be origins of other characters.
No. The Phelan's getting his own series.
Okay.
So the fun thing with him, he's going to go from the 30s up till modern day.
Okay.
And the modern day, the Ancient Blood series kind of.
And also, I'm thinking back to maybe even just 15 years ago with books like The Historian, where it used to be the vampire, like even Dracula, you might find in like just the historical fiction or the literary fiction section.
Yeah.
These were big kind of tome historical kind of books. But now you can do your own series with your own popular characters.
Yeah.
That's a difference.
Yeah, the benefit, the growth of small press and independent publishing has really been a boon to that.
Are yours? You are published. It's not.
I was. I had a publisher, and it didn't work out. I've had a couple of experiences with essentially con artists posing as publishers that took advantage of me, and back when I was first starting with Ancient Blood. So at this point, I've mostly gone to
Well, we were discussing that before. We did a lot of events where we said it's great. It doesn't matter how freaky your vampires are. There's a publisher. But, I mean, a lot of those e-presses and small presses from 10, 15 years ago are gone.
Yeah. Well, because the problem is a lot of them, they weren't business people. They were authors who published their own book and said, "Oh, I can do this. I can call myself a publisher, and I'll get a couple of my friends together and I'll publish their books." And the problem is, it's not a good business model. No. You can't really, if you don't know what you're doing, publishing is a hard business for people who know what they're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, all that marketing, all of that money that you have to put out, you're gone.
You have to know business. You have to know marketing.
Yeah.
But do you consider yourself a more of a business kind of oriented person, or purely the writer aspect?
Oh, I'm much more of a writer. I'm terrible at the business and marketing.
Now, you were laughing earlier at some of the videos because you heard everybody else also saying how they were pantsers, how they love just making it up and backtracking.
I can't do that at all. I can't do that. No. I am an outliner. I plan my stories as much as possible and create a roadmap.
Okay.
And then what will happen is I give myself freedom when I'm writing the actual scene to deviate, to take it in whatever direction it wants to go. But at least I've got a plan. I know where I'm going. So to me, I can't do the sit down, because if I sit down and say, "Hey, let's see where it goes," it generally goes nowhere. It just doesn't go anywhere. I need to know that there's an end point.
That's funny. Where can we get all your books?
They're all available on Amazon and Audible. I have a really good performer named Brian Rollins who narrates all of my books. And he does a very good job producing them. And they're all available on Kindle and in hardcover paperback through Amazon.
We mentioned earlier, a lot of times when you're going to horror festivals and events, like Horror Addicts, everybody's in California, we're over here in New Jersey.
Yes.
And we were talking about how spooky Mount Holly is and the Witch's Ball, and how when you go to events, that's when a lot of the books sell.
We got to represent. Yeah. Halloween's a good time. Halloween's a good time for us, but we need to find ways to get the vampires up all year round.
But it's also a catch-22. Yeah. Like I was saying, are you going to wear your suit and tie and your full regalia and all decked out? I wanted to be casual. We didn't know we were going to have to be sweating in the sunshine or not.
In between.
So, where can we find your website, your addresses?
My website is www.brianmckinleyauthor.com. You can see information there about all my books and my writing, and eventually I'll post stuff about what I'm doing.
Necessary Evil.
When I get around to it. I'm terrible at updating the website.
What was it, Brian P. McKinley?
No, just Brian McKinley.
Just Brian McKinley.
I've dropped the middle name from my whole thing. Too much to remember.
It's complicated, right? Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.